This film feels like two diametrically opposed films hastily thrown together. Considering Zack Snyder had to leave the project due to a tragedy, and the studio had Joss Whedon come in to complete the film, well, that makes sense. There's a lot of problems with this film. For one thing, every dramatic moment is usually countered with an unfunny joke.
What's the plan?
Okay, we're not ready for...
And the lighthearted parts, though there aren't many, are usually countered with something dark and brooding. It's a war of tones throughout the film, and neither really wins out over the other.
This is a bad idea.
Also, this film is so sick with characters, and we switch between them so much and so often, that no one actually feels like a main character. This also doesn't give the audience much to even like about any particular one of them. It's like they expect us to know them from other films and formats, and that's just not how films are supposed to work. Even sequels have to be stories that are complete unto themselves. You should design a movie to set up something else, even if that's exactly the reason you're making it.
If it gets in front of a camera, pauses a search, I'll let you know.
What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Justice League. Steppenwolf sucks. Not the band, they're okay. But the villain in this is so... he just... I want to start by saying that I actually quite enjoyed the first 20 minutes or so of this film.
I mean, damn it. How?
It's not, like, great or anything, but it seems like a decent start to something that isn't a superhero film. Like maybe something in line with Top Gun or something like that. Everything up to when Ryan Reynolds gets a power ring and everything gets really ugly.
Give me this. For post.
Much like it is with bad editing, bad special effects can ruin what would otherwise be a passable film. It would have been better if the entire movie was CGI instead of this half and half crap, because it's actually kind of okay when there isn't a human on screen to compare it to. But as soon as there is a person, you see just how crappy and cheap looking the special effects really are. It's even worse when people are wearing the special effects, which, after 20 minutes, happens constantly.
Ah, green!
Anyway, if it wasn't for this issue, the film would still suffer from an overly simplistic plotline where Sinestro isn't even the main villain, even though he's in the movie.
And destroy evil wherever it may hide.
But I guess that was to set up for a sequel that didn't happen. I guess no one wanted any more of this mutated Muppet movie. One last complaint, and that's that this film takes itself far too seriously, and more comedy throughout the film would have helped audience deal with the general weirdness of this movie a little better. In this 20-minute advertisement for Banks that stars George Reeves' Superman, it's incredibly campy and has some unintentional humor when people do things like lamenting that they didn't invest their money in a bank account when they should have.
I should have learned how to save and handle money a long time ago. Then this wouldn't have happened.
Or when Jimmy Olsen talks about saving up to buy a typewriter.
So you're cashing the bonds on this typewriter?
Only part of them. You see, the interest I got on my investment made the bonds worth a lot more than what I put into them.
Outside of the unintentional humor and bank advertising, there actually is a half-decent Superman adventure in this film. But there's too much advertising bogging it down to really consider it anything more than a simply adequate superhero story. This film is based on an excellent single-issue comic by Alan Moore, Brian Boland, and John Higgin. It's one issue. The problem is, they're stretching out the storyline to make it into a 75-minute film. It probably could have been a pretty good 30 minutes, but the major problem is that everything that was added to the story, which is a lot, it's just a bunch of poorly written garbage mostly focusing on Batman and Batgirl's relationship, which has never been a thing in the comic books. I don't know why movie makers keep shacking them up together. I mean, Alan Moore doesn't like it when people adapt his stuff anyway, and it's stuff like this that really makes me agree with him. When this film gets to the story he actually wrote, it's pretty good. Mark Hamill's Joker is great, as is Kevin Conroy as Batman. But that's just the parts that were taken directly from the comics. Nothing that's original here is any good. Especially this part. I don't care who Batman is dating, unless it's Catwoman. And him and Batgirl, who is the daughter of his best friend by the way, is just creepy. One last thing that's actually complimentary. The fights in this one are some of the most realistic in any DC film, animated or otherwise. But there isn't much of it, so it's not much of a boost. This film is about a trio of women whose mafia-ruling husbands get arrested and they all take over the mob.
But just to be clear, now we run this neighborhood.
This is yet another one of those films that's brought down basically by just one thing. The acting, the cinematography, the action, the mafia moments, and their use of music is all pretty good throughout the film. The story isn't half bad either, though there's one or two plot points I don't particularly like. But the problem is the tone, and this movie is completely tone deaf from start to finish. One scene might be lighthearted and comedic, the very next dark and violent, the next one melodramatic and sad, the next one fast-paced and filled with action, the next one incredibly slow and exposition-oriented. Without a consistent tone, your film is just the visual equivalent of word vomit.
Yeah, say it louder.
You know, those people who don't know how to shut up, so they just talk about everything in one long stream of consciousness, going randomly from one subject to the next. Like they were scared to death that if their mouth stops moving for a second, their brain might start working. Yeah, this movie feels like those people.
Can I do the other leg?
Sure.
This has a pretty good opening, and decent action throughout. It's bogged down by everything basically being summed up by non-stop voiceover narration though. Show don't tell, especially when all you're telling is what you're showing, and all you're showing is animation reused from something else.
In the 5 years following Jason's death, I redoubled my efforts to protect Gotham City. Alone.
I mean, it's like you're telling me this movie as if it were a book. It doesn't help that Bruce Greenwood is an incredibly wooden Batman in this film.
To blame someone else for what Jason had become. But I, alone, was responsible for Jason's path.
But the action is good enough that it almost makes the horrible storytelling style forgivable. Almost. Really bad movies can be enjoyable just by how bad they are. This is not the case for bad comedies.
You guys are incredible!
A joke that doesn't work just sucks all the comedy out of the room and creates an emotion somewhere between bored and somehow less intelligent just for hearing said non-joke.
What? Who dares?
Being this movie is being played as comedic, this makes most of the movie just god-awful. Also, most of the movie's plot and dialogue are overly simplistic.
We'll go first. Well, except for Batman, he kind of gets an exception because he's so grumpy.
I am not grumpy.
A lot of it is so childish or lowbrow, it's kind of a cringeworthy cringe fest of cringiness. But that's the whole movie, actually.
I need 1,000 words about the Metropolis Farmers Market by tomorrow. They have this amazing fertilizer exhibit, and if there's one person that knows how to write about manure, it's you, Kent.
However, this is the first movie on the list that manages to tell a complete story in 3-act structure without any major issues. I'm saying that this passes as a film, barely. The problem with this one is its bad dialogue.
These robots are corrupt. We should destroy them.
Batgirl knows best.
She's right. Yeah, destroy them.
It's very on the nose. And this might be because it's directed towards children, but even then, it just feels like it's talking down to its audience the whole time.
That's what's up. A perfect 10 for Ivy. Yeah, that's my green thumb girl getting the gold.
This is also some of the least believable of all the action sequences so far. It's very slow paced for one thing, and this might be to make it appear more cartoony to match the style, but instead just takes any urgency out of the scene that it might have had otherwise. These are conflicts with no stakes.
Yes! Cool. Good. Gooey, but good.
The other problem is the story. Now, you can make a movie about anything, but I think someone should have asked themselves somewhere along the way, is this film really worthy of its audience? And what can I do to make the story more interesting? As it is, the plot is one that feels more made for an episode of a teen drama television show than something worthy to be in the superhero genre.
Bumblebee, I need feedback. Right now? I think you're doing a great job.
As for some compliments, though the story is kind of lame and very childish, it doesn't fall apart at any time. Also, the animation and voice acting are very good. The problem with this movie is that it's basically a series of side plots that meander so much on unimportant things that the movie itself kind of forgets that it's supposed to be about Superman.
Guess you know how that could bug a guy, right?
That could bug.
Actually, this movie should have been called Richard Pryor Meets Superman or something, because that's essentially what it feels like.
Well, they're gonna have to see the police now. It's not your problem anymore.
Whoa!
Despite this complete lack of focus, this is still a fun movie that Superman is also in sometimes. There's a lot of humor throughout, and it's nice seeing a Superman movie where Lex Luthor isn't the bad guy, even if it's just for a Lex Luthor wannabe.
I asked you to kill Superman, and you're telling me you couldn't even do that one simple thing.
This film swings back and forth between taking itself seriously and being a parody of itself.
I did it! Oh yeah! Ew, what's that smell?
It kind of gives it a similar tone to Teen Titans Go stuff, but the humor isn't nearly as good.
New for you, too.
We can, Wonder Woman.
Why?
Cyborg doesn't wear clothes.
In fact, the humor is such crap, it's hard to consider most of it as actual jokes.
Petrified Pandora.
Villains working together?
I did not see that coming. I did.
Also, the story itself is actually pretty good for a Lego Justice League movie.
Saved the day. Again. Hey, you got it.
Oh, and at one point Sinestro says,
Prepare to be flushed to the other side of the galaxy.
And then Flash says,
Oh, I get it! Whoa! Flush! Like a toilet!
And then Sinestro says,
I said, prepare to be flushed to the other side of the galaxy.
And then Gorilla Grodd says,
I bet Flash didn't get it.
And then later on Sinestro says,
Because I flushed them all to the opposite side of the universe. I say flushed because I created this wormhole, you see, and it resembled a... you just had to be there.
And soon after that, Cyborg says,
All right, Sinestro, time to unflush the Justice League.
I just thought I'd show this as a lesson on how to properly play a joke to death. Wasn't a very good joke to begin with.